There are 6 tiny dots on the map that most people have never heard of, but they're the most dangerous pieces of real estate on Earth. These aren't your typical tropical paradise islands. These are America's forward military outposts, strategically placed to control the world's most contested waters. But here's what makes these islands absolutely terrifying. They're all sitting in places where superpowers are already on edge. China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are watching these bases 24/7, and any incident on these islands could escalate into global conflict faster than you can say nuclear deterrent. Today we're exploring America's most dangerous island outposts, the places where World War III would most likely begin. And trust me, after seeing how close these bases are to hostile territory, you'll understand why military strategists lose sleep over these tiny pieces of land. Guam, the Pacific fortress. Let's start with the big one, Guam. At 540 square kilometers, this island is roughly the size of Chicago, but it packs more military firepower than most countries. Military strategists call it America's unsinkable aircraft carrier, and China absolutely hates it. Despite being smaller than most major cities, Guam hosts Andersen Air Force Base, where the U.S. parks its nuclear-capable B-52 Stratofortresses and B-2 Spirit stealth bombers. These aircraft regularly conduct freedom of navigation flights that basically involve flying nuclear bombers right up to China's doorstep. But here's what makes Guam a World War III flashpoint. China has explicitly threatened to attack it. In 2017, North Korea threatened to launch missiles at Guam. The island's small size makes it incredibly vulnerable. Chinese hypersonic missiles could potentially destroy America's entire Pacific air power in the first hour of war. Diego Garcia, the secret fortress. Now let's talk about the island the U.S. government pretends doesn't exist for diplomatic purposes. Diego Garcia. This tiny atoll is just 44 square kilometers, smaller than Manhattan, but it's America's most secretive military base, positioned perfectly to threaten 3 different regions simultaneously. Despite being roughly the size of a small airport, Diego Garcia is where the U.S. launches its most sensitive military operations. Every major Middle East conflict since the 1990s has involved bombers taking off from this 44 square kilometer speck in the Indian Ocean. But here's the controversial part. The US and UK forcibly removed the entire native population of 2,000 people in the 1970s to build this base. The island's small size is both its strength and weakness. At just 44 square kilometers, it's easy to defend completely, but it's also incredibly vulnerable. A few well-placed missiles could destroy the entire base. Wake Island, the forgotten tripwire. Wake Island might look like an abandoned airstrip, but this 7.4 square kilometer coral atoll, roughly the size of 1,000 football fields, is actually one of the most dangerous places on Earth for accidental war. Wake Island sits directly in the path of North Korean missile tests. When Kim Jong-un launches his ICBMs toward the Pacific, they regularly fly over or near this 7.4 square kilometer target. One targeting error, one missile malfunction, and suddenly North Korea has attacked a U.S. military installation. The island's tiny size means it has almost no permanent military presence, just a few dozen contractors scattered across 7.4 square kilometers. But it's officially U.S. territory, which means any attack on this postage, stamp-sized island would trigger Article 5 of NATO and potentially start World War III. Here's what makes Wake Island terrifying. At just 7.4 square kilometers, an enemy could potentially occupy the entire island with a single company of soldiers before anyone noticed. What's the U.S. supposed to do? Start a nuclear war over a coral reef smaller than most city parks? Johnston Atoll, the chemical nightmare. Johnston Atoll is the 2.8 square kilometer island the U.S. military wishes it could forget. This tiny Pacific atoll, smaller than most shopping malls, was used for decades to store and destroy America's most dangerous chemical weapons, and it's still so contaminated that it could become a weapon itself. Despite being just 2.8 square kilometers, the island was used to destroy over 400,000 chemical weapons, including nerve gas, mustard gas, and biological agents. That's roughly 143,000 chemical weapons per square kilometer destroyed on this tiny atoll. But here's what makes Johnston Atoll a potential World War III trigger. Despite its contamination, the U.S. wants to use this 2.8 square kilometer toxic waste site as a radar and interceptor site for missile defense. Any military activity risks spreading chemical contamination across the Pacific. Kwajalein Atoll, the missile testing ground. Kwajalein Atoll covers 16 square kilometers, about the size of a small town, but it's where America tests its most advanced missile defense systems and intercontinental ballistic missiles. It's essentially a live-fire testing ground in the middle of the Pacific. The atoll hosts the Reagan test site, where the U.S. regularly fires missiles from California to test defense systems. These tests involve actual ICBMs flying thousands of miles to hit targets on this 16 square kilometer island, the same flight path real nuclear missiles would take in a war. Here's the terrifying part. Other countries' satellites can't tell the difference between a test missile aimed at Kwajalein and a real attack until it's too late. Every time the U.S. conducts a missile test, China and Russia have to decide whether America just launched a nuclear first strike. Shemya Island, the Arctic flashpoint. Finally, let's talk about America's most provocative island, Shemya Island in the Aleutians. At just 23 square kilometers, this remote outpost is literally within sight of Russian territory and hosts a massive radar installation that can track Russian missile launches in real time. The Aleutians are where Russian and American military aircraft play the most dangerous game of chicken on Earth. Russian bombers regularly probe Alaskan airspace, and American fighters scramble to intercept them. One pilot error, one miscommunication, and two nuclear powers are shooting at each other. What makes Shemya particularly dangerous is the weather. These islands experience some of the worst flying conditions on Earth. Constant storms, zero visibility, hurricane-force winds. When you're flying nuclear-capable aircraft in these conditions while being shadowed by enemy fighters, the margin for error is essentially zero. So there you have it. 6 tiny islands totaling less than 650 square kilometers combined that could determine the fate of human civilization. These aren't just military bases. They're the tripwires of World War III, where a single mistake could escalate into global nuclear conflict. The next time you see news about tensions in the Pacific or military exercises near these islands, remember, you're watching the most dangerous chess game in human history, played on some of the smallest boards on Earth. Which of these islands do you think poses the greatest threat? Let me know in the comments and subscribe to Earthwise for more geography that could change the world.